The Goblin was one of the first troops in the Clash universe. He has developed from a fast pickpocket to a sophisticated troop with different types of weapons. The melee Goblin in Clash Royale is carrying a dagger, and he is one of the few troops who is featured in several cards. I paired up with Lutz to reforge the Goblin Dagger. Lutz is an experienced blacksmith, and you can see some of his creations in movies, museums and festivals around the country. He definitely is the right one for the job. The blade itself will consist of 3 layers of steel. The middle layer will be a C60 high carbon steel that is surrounded by a layer of mild, low carbon steel from an old card wheel on each side. The C60 high carbon steel is the hard steel that will form the edge later on. First, Lutz brings the parts of the card wheel up to temperature and starts forging it into an even bar. After each heat, Lutz brushes off excess scale that forms during the process with a wire brush. As for the C60 high carbon steel, Lutz starts working with a piece of round stock, heats it up and hammers it into shape with his second power hammer. He's using different dies there, which allow him to stretch the material faster. Not to mention that this power hammer packs an even stronger punch. Now that we have the 2 bars, Lutz starts working them with his hand grinder to remove impurities and to create an even surface to guarantee an even forge weld. After evening out the surfaces, he starts grinding grooves into each bar that will interlock and work like channels to release any slack that could form during the forge welding process. It is always possible that slack gets included in the metal during forge welding, but these grooves will help to minimize the chances of these inclusions. He cuts the bars into 3 even pieces and starts stacking his billet. He applies a mixture of borax and iron powder between each layer as flux. Lutz uses a tack welder to weld his bars into place and also to attach a stick that will make it easier to handle the stacked material. He puts the billet into the forge and brings it up to welding temperature. He's continuously using borax to make sure that we get a nice solid bar after the welding process. The materials have to reach a specific temperature. Due to years of experience, Lutz knows exactly when to get the billet out of the fire and to start hammering it to weld the steel layers together. After beating the billet with a power hammer, Lutz moves to the anvil and finishes the weld with his own hands. As soon as the welding is complete, he moves to his smaller power hammer to forge out the tang of the blade. The tang is the back portion of the blade that will later be a part of the handle. He's also using a wet forging technique. Each hammer blow sounds like an explosion because the water is literally blasting off excess scale that forms on the surface of the metal. As soon as the blade is roughly forged into shape, Lutz begins laying in the bevels. We started with too much material to be on the safe side. After first measurings, we decide to remove some material. I assist Lutz to even out the blade with a sledgehammer and afterwards to remove the sides of the blade. Lutz is holding the hot cut tool while I am carefully striking it with the sledgehammer. Lutz refines the shape of the blade one last time and then puts it into a bucket of sand to let it cool down slowly. The blade is now ready for grinding. The Goblin Dagger's guard and pommel have a golden color, so we decided to make them of cast brass. We need a mold in order to cast these parts. Lutz starts creating models out of wood on the wood turning lathe and on the sander. It is way easier to work wood than to work brass, so Lutz really focuses on making this wooden model as detailed as possible. The mold is made of a special sand that has to be compacted around the models. He carefully fills the frames and refines the delicate parts. A thin film of talcum powder has to be applied to keep the forms from sticking together. He then adds the second frame of the mold and starts filling it to the top. The wooden guard and pommel have to be removed from the mold, leaving back cavities that will later on be filled with the molten brass. Lutz uses a long needle to create feeders, also known as risers. These feeders will help to prevent cavities inside the mold material as it cools down. Lutz cuts several pieces of brass like cartridge cases into shorter bits and puts them into a special ceramic crucible and places it directly into the forge. After most of the brass is molten, he pours it straight into the mold. It is time to prepare the blade for heat treating while the brass is cooling down in the mold. The blade is roughly ground into shape. Lutz checks it for cracks by letting it bounce on the anvil. The blade is perfectly fine and ready for one of the most critical steps. The heat treat puts the blade under a lot of stress, so Lutz covers the blade with a layer of clay that he harvested himself. The clay will work as an oxygen barrier to minimize oxidations on the blade itself. He brings the blade up to temperature and goes directly to the quench. Because of the composition of the blade and its unique shape, he decided to do a combination of oil and water quenches. The blade is now hardened and ready for more grinding. The guard and pommel have cooled down in the mold. The surfaces are rough and have to be smooth. Lutz carved the wooden model for the pommel on the wood turning lathe, so it's easiest to refine the cast brass pommel on the lathe as well. The blade is tempered at 200 degrees Celsius to remove excess hardness and to make it less brittle, while Lutz is working on the brass pieces. The blade is quenched and tempered. Even though Lutz already hand-forged the bevels, it will take a lot of time to grind and polish this bad boy into shape. He moves over to the sander and starts running the blade through the grids. We decided to use German elm wood for the handle. After sawing the piece of wood into shape, it is turned on the lathe. It is important that the handle has exactly the right dimensions. That's why Lutz is constantly checking its length and its radius. Now that we have all of our individual parts, it is time to adjust them, to give them a final polish, and to assemble the dagger. Lutz drilled a recess into the pommel and is now heating up the end of the tang and gently beats it into the cavity forming a rivet that will seal every single part of the dagger in its place. Big shout out to Lutz, he has shown so many different techniques. He made them look easy, but you can tell that tons of exercise and skill are required to do so. He has forged this dagger like an absolute boss. If you like his work, check him out on Facebook and Instagram. The Goblin Dagger is complete. It became a heavy but gallant weapon, ready for battle, and I think it is worthy of one of the most iconic troops of the Clash universe.
Here I go! I'm gonna win! Wow!